Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's going on between India and Pakistan, because if you've been following the channel, you'll know that I recently posted a video saying that India was preparing an attack on Pakistan. Well, unfortunately, that attack has now taken place.
The international community is urging calm after India launched airstrikes on Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Islamabad says that 26 people were killed, including a child, calling the attacks cowardly and a blatant act of war to which they will respond. There have been deaths on the Indian side of the line of control in Kashmir as a result of shelling between the two sides. India says it has struck 9 sites in Pakistan and Pakistan-controlled Kashmir in what it said was a focused, measured and non-escalatory manner. But Pakistan's defense minister said all the areas hit were civilian places, with the Pakistan army chief saying at least 26 people have been killed and 46 injured. Police officials in Indian-controlled Kashmir say at least 10 people have been killed, 48 injured during Pakistani shelling. And the United Nations Secretary-General has called for maximum military restraint from both countries, saying the world cannot afford a confrontation between India and Pakistan.
Now, as we discussed in the previous video, the reason why there is tension at the moment between India and Pakistan is because of the area known as Kashmir, which is actually divided in terms of the territory between India, Pakistan, and China also controls part of it. And there's been tension in this area for a long period of time. And on the 22nd of April, in the Indian-controlled part of Kashmir, a terrorist incident took place where 26 tourists lost their lives. And India have now retaliated in response to this. So before we go on to talk about those Indian strikes and what this potentially means for the global economy, let's hear from Tim Marshall, who's a preeminent journalist. He's written a number of books that are really quite interesting on how this situation in Kashmir actually came about.
47-48, the British leave. Indian subcontinent is divided, Pakistan, India. Kashmir, its ruler then, a Hindu, said, I don't want to be in either country, thank you. But Pakistani militants then attacked him and his supporters, so he then called on India to help, signed an act of accession that sparked the war between the two countries. And ever since then, Kashmir has also been partitioned. Pakistan administered Kashmir, Indian administered Kashmir. Troops from either side across the line of control, as it's called. So it's in this deeply resonant emotional atmosphere for both countries. India still claims the whole of it, saying the act of accession. Pakistan claims the whole of it, saying it's a Muslim majority area and consequently, given the divisions in 47-48, should be with them. And then behind a lot of this are the 6 rivers that run through it, a lot of them feeding into the Indus River, which is the lifeblood of Pakistan. But the rivers come through Indian-controlled Kashmir. They flow from the high Himalayas. And so India, in the final analysis, short of nuclear war, really does have, its hands on the tap.
So this is something that we discussed in the previous video. The INDUS Treaty basically says that India will allow the free flow of all of those 6 rivers into the Pakistani area. And obviously, as he's just discussed, Pakistan rely upon that because they're generating around 30% of all of their total electricity from hydro dams that have been set up on that river. So if India was to constrict the amount of water that's actually flowing into Pakistan, there's been talk of India establishing more hydro power itself further up those rivers and also damming the river, which would obviously stop the flow of water. That would have a serious impact on Pakistan, but also there's a lot of agriculture in that area that takes its water directly from the Indus River. So if the amount of water flowing through was to reduce, that would potentially then reduce the amount of water available to those farmers, and that's generating around 25% of Pakistan's GDP. So the flow of that water is really quite critical. So although there's tension in the Kashmir area itself, there's also some bigger economic implications that would affect the whole of Pakistan.
Very significantly, you had India pulling out of the Indus Water Treaty. Now, Pakistan has made clear if India blocks the flow of water to Pakistan, they would regard that as an act of war. It would be very significant indeed. That has not come to pass yet, but it is an illustration, this kind of ratcheting up of tensions between the two. But there is a lot to lose. This is clearly two nuclear armed nations.
So I think the points made there were quite good, but India haven't actually done anything with regards to the flow of the water. So they've done these strikes, they've undertaken these strikes in Pakistani areas, but they're not actually doing anything to stop that water flowing yet. And Pakistan have made it clear that if they do, they would consider that to be an act of war. And as she also mentioned, both of these countries have nuclear weapons. I think that's the big overriding concern here, is that if any sort of tension or crossfire gets out of hand, then potentially we're at risk of these two nations starting to threaten each other with nuclear strikes. So let's have a look at what strikes have actually been undertaken by India in response to those terrorist attacks on the 22nd of April. This map shows the location of the 9 areas that India struck in its attacks. It claims that all of these are terrorist locations. Now, interestingly, you can see that 8 of them in the top here are all located in the Kashmir region. However, the one on the far left-hand side down at the bottom here is actually in the Punjabi area of Pakistan. So that's actually going outside of the Kashmir conflict. And I think that's the most surprising out of all of these. So let's hear what's actually been going on and what the implication of these strikes are.
Well, I think what's particularly striking about this inflection point is that India struck deeper into Pakistan than it has since the 1971 war. These are two nations that have had decades of conflict, 3 wars. But the most recent strike back in 2019, this is certainly more significant than that they went into Punjab province. Now, the Indians say that this was proportionate, that it was focused, and that it is not an escalation of the tensions between them. But Pakistan, in turn, says it is an unprovoked and blatant act of war. And now it must be said also that the attack in Kashmir on civilians was also the most significant in decades. And India are firmly pointing the finger at Pakistan and their alleged involvement in this, which Pakistan completely refutes.
So what we've heard there is that this is the biggest retaliation by India since the 1970s. So that's over 50 years. So this is actually escalating into a serious incident. Now, India have made it clear that they're not looking to escalate this. They are retaliating for what they said happened in Kashmir, which they believe was supported by Pakistan. Now, Pakistan have denied that, and so they're now saying that this is an unprovoked attack on Pakistan.
There were strikes on 9 sites, 8 of them inside Kashmir, which is what you might have expected, but one of them at Bahawarabad. And Bahawarabad is in Punjab. And that was interesting because they hit a mosque, which the Indians say was one of the operating centres of Jaish-e-Mohammed, which is one of the groups that they blame for some of the terrorism. And the other areas that they hit, particularly Muzaffarabad, they claim, the Indians claim, was Lashkar-e-Toiba, which is another group, which is the offshoot of which claimed responsibility originally for the 22nd of April attacks. So the fact that they've hit inside Pakistan itself, not just in Kashmir, is something of an escalation. Now, the Indians are saying this was a very precise strike with missiles, and that in a way this draws a line under it as far as the Indians are concerned. So they're inviting the Pakistan side to do something purely symbolic and not to escalate. Pakistanis don't look as if they're in the mood to do that. They say that they will respond at a time and place they're choosing.
So let's hear exactly what Pakistan have said in terms of their official response.
This was an unprovoked, deliberate act of war by India, who launched missile, drone, and airstrikes into Pakistani territory. Over the past 2 weeks, Pakistan has been on the receiving end of belligerent threats by the Indian government. We have time and time again insisted that our hands are clean and offered an impartial inquiry to any and all accusations. Unfortunately, India rebuffed those offers by Pakistan and have chosen instead to target innocent civilians. Pakistan reserves the right under the UN Charter to respond. So far, the Pakistan armed forces have acted bravely and with precision. In self-defense during these attacks, we downed 5 Indian aircraft. India's attacks took place in Pakistani territory, targeting cities where innocent civilians live, civilian infrastructure, including a dam. Pakistan does reserve the right to respond at a time of its choosing, at a place of its choosing, and through whatever means it chooses to do so.
So Pakistan's saying that it will respond and it'll decide when and where it's going to respond. So it's not going to give India any indication of that. But one interesting thing that was said there was that Pakistan shot down 5 Indian planes. Now, that's been unconfirmed. India certainly hasn't said that it's lost 5 of its jets. And there's a lot of questions being raised as to whether or not India actually deployed any jets, whether they needed to, and certainly whether they crossed into Pakistan airspace to be able to deliver these strikes. So let's hear a bit more on that topic.
They claim to have brought down 5 Indian aircraft. I find that very hard to believe, to be honest, because the Indians are now operating Rafale aircraft, and they don't need to leave Indian airspace, to be honest, to get some of the missiles into the targets that they did. So I'd be surprised if they brought the aircraft down. They might have brought a drone down. That's entirely plausible that the Indians would have had observation drones above some of these targets. Maybe maybe more than one came down. But the last time the Indians lost an aircraft, in 2019, they lost a MiG-21, and they got the pilot back in an act of reconciliation. The Pakistanis captured the pilot, gave him back. If they brought down 5 aircraft, I find that very hard to believe.
They sent missiles, not planes. So the missiles were fired from India into Pakistan, but Indian planes did not cross the border. That, which is another reason why it's nonsense that Pakistan has shot down 5 Indian jets. They haven't.
So what we're hearing here from experts is that they don't believe that India did deploy any jets that crossed into Pakistan airspace. And so it looks unlikely that Pakistan did shoot down 5 Indian planes. That's certainly what the media is saying, that Pakistan has claimed that it did. Now, one of the interesting things, I think, when you look at the area of Kashmir is that obviously some of it is controlled by China. So they are a neighbour to what's going on here. And the big question is whether or not China would be drawn in to this war, this conflict. And if they are, which side would they favour? Who would they prefer in terms of India or China?
China is a big supporter of Pakistan and will diplomatically side with them, but it wants calm. I don't see any real heavy military assistance going in. Basically, that 15% it's Aksai Chin. It's very important that for China to keep control of it. It links Tibet through to Xinjiang province and then down through Pakistan to a port at the bottom of Pakistan. So if push comes to shove, the Chinese might help the Pakistanis because they want that corridor kept open, but we are nowhere near that.
So what we're hearing here is that China economically is favouring Pakistan because it has a port in Pakistan that it utilises. So it moves product through the Kashmir area into Pakistan and then down to this port, which it then exports around the world. So from an economic perspective, China wants to make sure that Pakistan stays friendly and that it doesn't lose access to that port and that route. But I don't think from a military point of view, China is looking to get involved. It's certainly not looking to back up any of these sides in terms of a war, and it wants to actually de-escalate the situation and bring things back to a relative calm. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because we recently been talking about what's happening between India and Pakistan, and it was likely that India was going to respond to the terrorist incident that took place on the 22nd of April. And that response has now come to fruition. It struck 9 sites in Pakistan and Kashmir. But I think interestingly, when you look at the map of where it struck, the one interesting location is in the Punjab because that is in Pakistan itself. It's not on the Kashmir border. And I think from Pakistan's point of view, that's what they're saying in terms of India has now done an unprovoked attack into Pakistan. And they've said that they will respond at a time and place that suits them. So that's now hanging in the air. It's out there. Now, in terms of what's going on here from an economic point of view, we've got the fifth largest nation in the world economically. India recently overtook the UK to get to number 5, and it's the biggest country in the world in terms of population, 1.4 billion people. So from a military perspective, India is much stronger than Pakistan. It has more people, it has more planes, more ships, more artillery, more people in its army. Pakistan has a population of around 250 million people. So it's the fifth largest country in the world. So it is quite a large country in itself. So we've got two heavyweights here who are now squaring up against each other. And of course, this isn't the first time that we've seen crossfire between India and Pakistan. They've actually had 3 wars in the past. But hopefully, this isn't going to escalate into a full scale war. But where we're sitting at the moment, if you look at Pakistan's perspective, from an economic point of view, they've been in crisis for quite a long time. The country is struggling economically. And it's also had a lot of political turmoil. It's had a change of government. The previous prime minister has been put into prison, Imran Khan, the former cricketer. So he's being held. So there's a lot of things that have gone on over the past 18 months or so from a political perspective. And as we've talked about in the past, one of the things that unites people in most countries is if you have some sort of war against your favourite enemy. So from Pakistan's point of view, if it did get into a conflict, it potentially could unite the people of Pakistan behind the current leaders because they'd be fighting a war against their long-time enemy. Now, I'm not suggesting that that will happen from a political perspective, but there is always a risk in these situations that there can be political agendas as well as exactly what's going on right now. And I guess the other point to note really from today's video is that there is a risk here that we've got 2 of the 9 nuclear armed nations who are now in conflict. Now, this conflict at the moment is relatively small scale, so I'm not suggesting that it's going to escalate into a full-scale nuclear attack. But obviously, there is always a risk when you've got 2 countries that have nuclear weapons and they're coming into direct conflict that this could escalate. If one starts to threaten to use weapons, then obviously the other could retaliate, and that is the major concern here. So the overall summary of today's video is what we've seen following the terrorist incident that took place on the 22nd of April in Kashmir, is that India has now deployed strikes. It's hit 9 targets in the Kashmir and Pakistan area. Pakistan has said that this is unprovoked, that they had nothing to do with those attacks that took place on the 22nd of April, and that they will respond at a time and place that suits them. And the really interesting question is, what will that response look like, and what will India do in retaliation to that response? So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. And thank you so much to everyone that's supporting the channel. If you bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks, thank you for that. Really appreciate it. And if you're a long-term supporter, either through Patreon or YouTube membership or buy me a coffee membership, thank you for that long-term support. Really helps keep me motivated. And here's something to put a smile on your face.